Welcome to Face to Face, connecting theater makers to the public, a program from the Legacy Theater and socialdistancetheater.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Face to Face. My name is Lauren Rosenay, and I am the Legacy Theater's company manager. Today on the show, we have Lynne Lugosi Sparks. If you recognize the name Lugosi, it is from Bela Lugosi, who is pictured right behind me. Also is Lynn's grandfather, and Bela Lugosi was the original Dracula in the 1931 film, and he was also the original Dracula in the Broadway play. So we are very excited to have Lynn on the show today to talk more about Bela Lugosi's life and how we are continuing to keep his legacy alive. So thank you, Lynn, so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So if you don't mind, I would love to start off talking a little bit about how Bela Lugosi has these ties to Connecticut theater.
Yeah. Bela Lugosi had an established stage career in Hungary before he came here. So that is really where he honed his craft. And although he is, famous for his role in the 1931 film Dracula, he did continue to act on the stage after he did that film and in between other films in both tours of Dracula and Arsenic and Old Lace and some other plays. And so those tours brought him to Connecticut on multiple occasions.
And did he do anything at the Shubert Theater in New Haven?
We know that Dracula 1927 premiered in New Haven, Connecticut, and then went, of course, to Broadway, where it had great success. So the ties to Connecticut are strong as far as the role that Bela Lugosi created, which has made him an icon.
Yeah. And do you know the story behind how your grandfather got into acting, and how did that life come about for him?
Yeah, well, he had acting in his blood. As a child, he would stage plays in the neighborhood in Hungary where he grew up, and actually left home at 14 to become an actor. So he, that's something that was obviously a passion to him, and which he had no formal training for, but just, started out in local theaters in small parts and worked his way up through the theater system in Hungary to become one of the, premier actors in Budapest in the National Theater.
So prior to Bela Lugosi playing the famous Dracula, he also had some prior theater experience.
Yes, as it relates to Connecticut, Bela Lugosi arrived in the United States in December of 1920 and made his way to New York to their Hungarian community. And by February of 1921, he was already featured in a Hungarian language play, which debuted in Connecticut and then moved on to New York. And so that was interesting to me, and looking back through his biography before our interview, to realize that he was there that early after arriving here in the United States, and then was in another play called The Werewolf prior to Dracula. So 1922, I believe he was in The Werewolf.
So did the Broadway show of Dracula come before the film?
Yes. It was a Broadway show was in 1927, and then, went from a few cities starting in New Haven, and then moved to Broadway and was there for over a year.
Wow. And then, so after the film, did he ever go back to Broadway to continue that role?
Never on Broadway, but he continued to tour with different groups that wanted to, stage Dracula really for the rest of his life. And he came to Connecticut, I think, for both Dracula and Arsenic Old Lace, Three Indelicate Ladies, and for, multiple kind of vaudeville appearances. And so it seemed like whenever he did his East Coast tours, there's definitely stops in Connecticut. So I I wish I could have somehow walk in his shoes and have been around or had spoken with people who met him there, because obviously he visited many times over his life.
That's amazing. I love how, you know, everyone knows him from the Dracula film, but he has this extensive theater career. That's really cool to talk about.
Right. He was in hundreds and hundreds of plays in Hungary before he came here. I think well over 200 in Budapest alone, and then 48 stage productions in the United States, in addition to 113 film appearances. So he has a very long career, very varied career, although obviously focused in the horror science fiction genre. Yes, you know, stage acting was his true love. You know, I think after being typecast in the film Dracula, I don't think he ever felt that he really got to have the film or stage roles where he could really showcase his talent in various roles. And he had a commanding presence, and I've read multiple stories of his professionalism on stage. You know, he knew his lines, he hit the marks, and you know, he often, when he traveled around the East Coast doing the tours of Dracula and other plays, you know, he really was a mentor to the young actors because he had such experience on the stage and a commanding voice that, you know, he knew you needed to project to the back of that room. So when he walked in and he started saying his lines, people paid attention.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. Those are things that you don't always hear about him, you know? So that's really special. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So your role in the Lugosi LLC, also known as the Lugosi Estate.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what your role is and what you do on a daily basis there?
Yeah, well, I wear a lot of hats, but primarily I've taken this job on from my dad. I work alongside my dad, who of course has been doing this his whole life in addition to his career as an attorney. But we try to further Bela Lugosi's legacy through, you know, projects that are important historically. We have a collection of films at the Academy Film Archive, the Bela Lugosi collection, to preserve his films. And, you know, we've donated the Cape to the Academy Museum, which will be opening next year. And, you know, we try to do projects like this where we talk to people, we, you know, reach out to the next generation of fans to continue his legacy. He was so much more than Dracula, but of course, we appreciate that he has, you know, is known for that now. But in addition to the legacy projects that we do, we have a licensing business where we license his name and likeness on merchandise. And that in a way also helps us continue his legacy.
Mm-hmm. And then, so whenever we see his face on billboards or on the internet, is that all something that goes through your company?
Well, hopefully that's what we're trying to make sure, that anything that is produced commercially is licensed through us, mostly so that we can make sure that his image is maintained in a respectful way, in a creative way, and not used for any purposes that we don't feel are appropriate.
Your grandfather really was one of the most iconic monster characters ever. So how do you feel as someone so engulfed in, you know, the Bela Lugosi vampire world? How do you feel when you see these new renditions of horror and monster films coming out?
It's funny because anytime a new vampire project comes out, television, you know, film, it's always there's always a reference to what extent, it differs from project to project, but, Bela Lugosi created that interpretation on the stage, which is very different from Bram Stoker's description of Dracula in the novel. But it was so compelling, his performance, that no matter what project, new project comes up, there's always a reference to him, whether it's his voice, his mannerisms, his dress, or the way he interpreted how Count Dracula would act. So, for us, we're happy to see all the new projects because it really is a tribute to him each time. We see a new version.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you are able to appreciate things and love how things are evolving. And in some way, I agree with you. It is sort of keeping his memory alive. And I think that's really great.
I mean, the people, for whatever reason, people love the vampire, love Dracula. It's a character that just isn't ever going to go out of style. I don't think. It's, reinterpreted in different ways for different times.
And I know that there was also a landmark case, the Lugosi versus Universal case, that culminated in the California Celebrity Rights Act. I would love if you could share a little background to that and the result that it had.
Yes, well, in a nutshell, because the case stretched out for, I think, over 13, 14 years. But my dad brought the case against Universal when he was still in law school at USC. So it was brought to his attention that Universal was producing merchandise, models, lunchboxes, toys, with his dad's likeness on it without his permission. So he brought the case against them, and they actually won in the lower courts. And the court said that, yes, Bela Lugosi owned his interpretation of Dracula. That belonged to him. And so that was a win for the family and for my grandfather. But unfortunately, it did go to the Supreme Court of California, and it was overturned in Universal's favor. And the reason it was overturned was not because they didn't agree that Bela Lugosi owned his own interpretation of Dracula, that he was Dracula, but that there was no precedent, there was no law in place guaranteeing that a celebrity could pass down his name and likeness rights to his heirs. So because of that, they lost the case. But what it did is, in essence, it was overturned with the California Celebrity Rights Act, which was a law that said that a deceased celebrity's name and likeness rights were a property right. So it was a property that you could pass down to your heirs. And so because of that, the families of celebrities have control over their relatives' name and likeness.
Wow.
For commercial use. Yeah.
Right. And like, besides your own circumstance, have you seen the Celebrity Rights Act help other situations?
Oh, sure. Once it was passed in California, other states followed suit. There's variations in each state's law, but you think of John Wayne, Lucille Ball, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, all of these estates are able to, have control over their family members' rights because of that initial case, Lugosi versus Universal.
Yeah, wow, that is really special.
It's an interesting case, and I'm really proud of my dad for, bringing that as a student, and, really following it through up until today. We get asked about it all the time. He gets asked to speak about it, and it's a case that's studied in law school all the time, as under intellectual property law.
And I think that's great that, your father was such an advocate for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through life with the name Lugosi, can you talk a little bit about that? Do you have any funny stories, or do people recognize that name?
Yeah, I mean, people do recognize the name. Growing up, more so, people that are a little bit older still recognize it, and I get comments on it. My dad, of course, having the name Bela Lugosi Jr., he gets asked about it almost every day of his life, you know. So it's a name that's kind of embedded in our culture along with his face. You know, that name conjures up an image of Dracula, and it's interesting that people of all walks of life and backgrounds know that name. So it is fun to have it recognized and chat about it with people. Everybody has their own memory of when they first saw Dracula, or, you know, or watching it with their parents or grandparents. So it really brings people together to talk about it.
That's so exciting. And do you have any fun memories of watching the Dracula film and, you know, kind of thinking back like, wow, like this is my grandfather?
Yeah, you know, I of course didn't really become aware of it until maybe upper elementary school, but then it was just kind of, it didn't really, I didn't know the impact that he had then. You know, I knew he was an actor. I knew he played Dracula. We had the pictures around the house along with pictures from a lot of his other roles. But it wasn't really until I was older that I realized what an impact he had on film and our culture.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, I would love to know, has there been any other people in your family that have explored acting or theater or the entertainment world?
No, not yet. We'll see though. Right now there's 7 Lugosi great-grandchildren, I'm sorry. And we'll see what they do.
Wow, big steps to fill.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Lynn, for being on the show today. And I especially appreciate you talking about Bela Lugosi's ties to Connecticut theater.
Yes.
Since we are theater in Connecticut, so it's great to have that kind of connection.
Yes.
And yeah, just thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me again, and good luck with rebuilding the theater, and hopefully a new season coming soon.
Yes, thank you for your well wishes.
Okay.
All right, we'll speak soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Face to Face. We would like to thank our sponsors, Oak Tree Development and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, and Brad Ross for the themed music. You can follow us on legacytheaterct.org.